In this video I'll be showing you how to take the project variables you created in the last video and make them applicable when you change screens. So in order to do this, we'll need a timer. The timer function will enable you to consistently run an action, or in our case we're only going to run it once, and this will occur when the screen is loaded. So firstly, this timer is going to be called Celsius check, and we're also going to need, excuse me, that's not correct, we're going to need a clock check as well, and this is also going to occur when the screen is loaded. So what these need to do is to run an if statement. So we'll use another logic builder. So firstly, clock check, and this is going to check whether the clock is visible or not. So clock visible equals true, is clock visible, and if it is, then we are going to run set clock visible, and if it's not, we're going to run set clock invisible. So you'll notice this is very similar to what we had before, where it is clock. However, the actions are actually inverted, so that's why we couldn't use the previous if statement. So now that we've set is clock visible, we're going to need to do the same for is Fahrenheit. Well, that's is Celsius, and this is going to be a Celsius 3 in this case, because we've already got 2. So here we want to check if Celsius equals true, and if this is true, then we're going to want to set Celsius. If it's false, we're going to want to set Fahrenheit. So what you should see here is now if we run it, sorry, I haven't actually linked the two together yet. So the Celsius check needs to run is Celsius 3, and the clock check needs to run is clock visible. Now once again, if we run this, you should see that if we go to the settings page and toggle these two, leave the settings page and come back to it, these are actually still changed. So that's our first step. Next is to apply the same changes to our main screen, so that this unit's value here changes and this clock visibility changes as well. As well as that, we're going to need to add an alternate scaling for the Fahrenheit. So moving back to the first screen, we'll once again need to add our timer, or both of our timers. So here we've got is Celsius 2 and is clock visible. And both of these are going to run only once. So we'll start with the clock, because that's the easiest one. So for this, what we'll actually do is we'll get an action, we'll need our if statement, our logic builder. Clock is clock visible. Nope. Clock visible. Let's call it is clock visible 2. And we'll run this to check the property clock visible equals true, and we'll need to create the actions that make this visible or invisible appropriately. So we're going to use the action change property for this, set clock visible, and now to change the properties you actually double click on any of them, and then you have a drop down box of all your elements. So in this case we want digital clock, and this is going to be setting it to visible. So you'll notice it's already toggled to visible, but we need to ensure that if it's not visible, it changes it to visible. So you just need to check this checkbox here to say that the visible property needs to be set to this, no matter what it was previously. And that will make it okay. And next we need is clock available to, so we need our other action element. So set clock invisible. And once again, loading this up, we can go to our digital clock. And this time, just by toggling it to invisible, you should see that it's checked automatically. So that's our two settings there done. So now we need to make it so that this will run the check is clock visible to, and this, if true, will set clock visible, and if false, will set clock invisible. So finally, we're going to need another logic builder for the Celsius. So this is going to be is Celsius 3 in this case, and once again this is going to check the variable is Celsius to see if it's true. And if this is the case, so let me just link this to it. So is Celsius 2 needs to link to is Celsius 3, which is the logic builder. If this is the case, we need to create the action elements that will run to make the appropriate changes. Before we can do this, however, we're going to need the slightly different scaling. So in order to do that, we're actually going to need a second text box identical to the first. So I can do this by copying and pasting it. So if I place it down here for now, this is going to be digital meter Celsius, and this is actually going to be digital meter Fahrenheit. Now, when the Celsius meter is at 100 degrees C, the Fahrenheit is actually going to be at 212. So I'm going to replace that value. Next, I'll need to position it in exactly the same place and make it invisible. So 6384. And then I'll toggle its visibility to false. Next up, we have to add the digital display scaling here. So what I'll actually do is I'll drag in a second one of these, and I'll call this digital display Fahrenheit, and set the analog input as the same, and the text element to the digital meter Fahrenheit. And I'm actually going to go back and change this to digital display Celsius just for clarity. So this had a range of 0 to 100, whereas the Fahrenheit will have a range of 32 to 212. So I'm just going to input that and just ensure that this valid value range actually sticks to the maximum values as well. So now that that's done, we have two appropriate digital scalings which are both lined up with each other. So when our is Celsius 3 occurs, we need two change property actions that are possible. One is going to be set Celsius, and the other is going to be set Fahrenheit. So in the case of set Celsius, we've got several actions we'll need to change. Firstly, we're going to need the digital meter Celsius to be set to visible, along with the digital meter Fahrenheit being set to invisible, as is presently the case. And we're also going to need to change the text in units from degrees C, well, to degrees C, but we need to ensure that it stays at degrees C. Okay, and finally the set Fahrenheit action will need to change the digital meter Celsius visibility to false and the digital meter Fahrenheit visibility to true. As well as that, the units will need to be changed to Fahrenheit. So with that done, all we need to do now is to link this up. So if it's Celsius equals true, then we set Celsius. If it's not, then we set Fahrenheit. and assuming our clock is already linked, which it is, that should perform the appropriate behavior. So if we now run the emulator, you'll see that it's defaulting to degree C obviously, and the clock visibility is true. So if we come here and change the clock visibility to false and change to Fahrenheit, you should see here that we now have 32 and Fahrenheit, and the visibility of the clock is now invisible. And so the scaling is also changed. So you'll notice here that because of the text box's size now increasing further than it would have, I've actually forgotten to set the decimal place to 1. So what I need to do to change that is to come in here and set decimal places to 1. And if I run that again, then you should see that even if I set it to Fahrenheit, it shouldn't overrun into the degrees F label box. And there you have it. So thank you for watching the Panel Pilot ACE Advanced tutorials, and I hope they've been useful.